In the name of God, here we're discussing about the heart physiology. As you may already know, the main function of the heart is for generating gradient pressure in order to rotate the blood through the two circulation system, pulmonary and systemic circulation. And for this circulation to be efficient, it has to be one-way blood flow. So there is a couple of the valves that ensure that this circulation will be one way. And also based off the metabolic need of the different tissue and different organ, this blood supply have to be regulated. So in this course and the subsequent one, which is the circulation system, we are discussing about all this topic, generating pressure gradient and the mechanism of the blood circulation circulating through the this pulmonary and systemic circulation. So we can consider heart as a pump which has four chambers, two primary pumps and two main pumps. The primary pumps names atrium and the main pumps name ventricle. So if you look at here, you see the ventricles, a right ventricle and the left ventricles. You easily can recognize that the left ventricle wall is more thick than the right one. Why it's thicker than the right one is important. You have to remember that because the left ventricle generates higher pressure, so it need to be more powerful. So that's why the thickness of the muscle here is thicker. And why the left ventricle has to generate high pressure? Because it has to send the blood to the more resistant pathway, like systemic pathway. As you know, this is bigger than the pulmonary pathway, so it need higher pressure in order to just circulate the blood through that. So the high resistance system need high pressure for circulation, and for generating high pressure, we need a more powerful pump. If you remember, we compared the cardiac muscle cell with the smooth muscle cell and skeletal muscle cells, and may you remember that cardiac muscle cells somehow is like smooth muscle cells in, and somehow is like skeletal muscle cells. So in this case, that between the cardiac muscle cells there is a gap junction, and this muscle work as a sensation. All those cell fiber work as a unit, so it is like a smooth muscle cells, and it's involuntary like smooth muscle cells, but the molecular mechanism of the contraction in cardiac muscle cells is like skeletal muscle cells, and also the appearance of these cardiac muscle cells like skeletal muscle cells is striated. So here we have a striated muscle. If you look at here, the cardiac muscle cells just divided to two different branches. Each muscle fibers divided, and they attach together end by end. Each cell attached to the next one end by end. And here in the place of the connection, we call it intercalated disc, because here the membrane of the two cells are just folded and just they are interdigited. That's why we call it intercalated disc. Here in intercalated disc, there is a two junction between the cells, gap junction in order to keep the cells together during contraction, and gap junction in order to make it possible to these cells work as a sensation and as a unit. As we mentioned, cardiac muscle cells are involuntary. For this function, it has a pacemaker, which could generate action potential, which we call it sinoatrial node. This sinoatrial node generate action potential, and this action potential will spread all through the atrium. Then it go to the another node, which we call it AV node or atrioventricular node. And then after a delay, it will spread all through the both ventricle, and it make it possible to heart cell to be excited. So the velocity of the signal through the different part of the heart are not same. So the signal transduction through the nodes and through the especially atrioventricular node and bundle and the AV bundle are zero point 0.3 to 0.5 millimeter per second, but and through the cardiac muscles it is zero point 0.5 meter per second, and the velocity through this high velocity bundle, which we call it his Purkinje bundle, especially the Purkinje fibers, are up to 4 meter per second. So there is a different velocity in signal transduction through the cardiac muscles or cardiac tissue. The highest, remember, the highest one are in the Purkinje fiber, and the slow one is in the AV bundles. The OV bundle is zero point 0.3, and fiber of Purkinje are 4 meter per second, the velocity of them. So if you look at the action potential in this different part of the heart, you see two kind of the action potential. One we call it a slow action potential, and another one we call it fast action potential. The slow action potential is happen in sinoatrial nodes and AV nodes, and the fast action potential happen in the cardiac atrial muscles, ventricular muscle, and his Purkinje bundle. Again, notice that the fast action potential has a plateau, which means it will depolarize and it will remain in the depolarization state for a while. So this depolarization state or plateau are longer in ventricle muscles and Purkinje fiber than atrial muscle. We will discuss about it why the plateau here is longer. So here we are discussing about the ionic mechanism of these differences between two action potential, fast action potential and slow action potential. This is a very important. Remember, in each phase of the action potential, what ionic carrying is higher. So first go to the fast action potential. Fast action potential has 5 phases, like phase 0, which is a fast depolarization. That's why we call this action potential fast action potential. Then we have primary repolarization, which we call it phase A. Then we have plateau, which is phase 2. Then we have repolarization phase, which is phase 3. And we have resting stage, which is phase 4. So in the fast action potential, phase 4 is stable. There is no change. It's negative, like minus 90, and it is stable. So it's need an stimulus to bring this membrane potential to the threshold. Then we have phase 0. The phase 0 is because of high permeability to sodium ions. So here we have voltage gated sodium channel. Voltage gated sodium channel will be open after the membrane potential reach the threshold. Then we have very fast depolarization. So as you know, the voltage gated sodium channel are very fast. They will be active fast, and then will be inactive, and it's need to bring the membrane potential to the all the way to the resting in order to bring back this voltage gated sodium channel to the resting state, and then we can use it again. So but after the phase 3 we have phase 1, which is a primary repolarization. It's because of the opening the a special kind of the potassium channel named transient potassium channel. Then this channel are transient, as its name says. They will be closed very fast, and then we go to the plateau phase or phase 2, which is relatively stable, and it stay in the depolarization state. The cause of this plateau is very important, especially remember the cause of this depolarization. It's because of both increase in the calcium permeability and decrease in potassium permeability. So both increase in calcium permeability and decrease in potassium permeability make this phase stable or relatively stable. Then in the end of the plateau, the permeability to calcium will decrease and permeability to the potassium ion will increase because of opening of the delay voltage gated potassium channel. Then we have repolarization, then everything go back to the resting stage, which is a resting 4, and in the resting we have the leakage channel of the potassium that make resting membrane potential very close to the potassium equilibrium potential. So as you if you remember, the potassium equilibrium potential is minus 94. So this is the ionic mechanism of the fast action potential or action potential with plateau, which happen in the cardiac muscle and cardiac His Purkinje bundle. So, but slow action potential, which is happen in the SA node and AV node, in this case, in this action potential, the plateau phase, which is a phase 4, is not stable. It's always depolarization happen here. So it's depolarizing phase, but slow depolarizing until it's reached the threshold. Then we have phase 0, which is relatively to the fast action potential is slower. That we call it a slow action potential. Then we have no phase 1 and plateau. Then we have phase 3, which is repolarizing phase, and it go back to the resting stage. Again, we have a slow depolarization in the resting phase, which is different with what we already know. So what is the ionic mechanism of this depolarization in the resting? It is because here, compared to the fast action potential cells, we have lower permeability to the potassium. Remember, first, lower permeability to the potassium, higher permeability to the sodium, which we call it funny currents, and high permeability to the calcium through the transient calcium channel. So these three ionic conditions make cell to be depolarized. When the cell reach the threshold, then another kind of the calcium channel, which we call it L-type calcium channel, will be open. This L-type calcium channel is voltage dependent or voltage gated. So, but it will be open or active slower than this voltage gated sodium channel. So this phase will be relatively slower than fast action potential. So in the top of the this action potential, this calcium channel will be closed, will be inactive. Then voltage gated potassium channel, or better to say delay voltage gated potassium channel, will be open and repolarization will happen. So remember, here we have phase 4, which is unstable, which is resting membrane potential. It is because the lower permeability to potassium and higher permeability to the sodium and calcium. This permeability to the sodium in this phase, which is resting, we call it funny current. Then the cell will reach the threshold, another kind of calcium channel, which we call L-type calcium channel or voltage gated L-type calcium channel, will be open. It is the cause of this depolarization phase. Then it will be inactive, and delay voltage gated potassium channel will bring back the cell membrane potential to the resting level, all the way to the resting level. So as already mentioned, the mechanism of this plateau phase is permeability to the calcium and decrease or low permeability to the potassium during the plateau. So that's why the action potential in the cardiac muscle are so long, because of this plateau. But if you compare it to the action potential in the skeletal muscle, you will find that, the action potential duration in the skeletal muscle is very short. It's like a millisecond and something like this. But in cardiac muscle, it just long, like 200 to 200 to 50 or sometimes 300 millisecond. So this why action potential in cardiac muscle have to be so long, and what is the benefit of this long action potential? So first, remember that the short action potential in the skeletal muscles make it possible to have a tetany. Why it's happened? Because this short action potential, when finished, the refractory period also will finish, and you can excite cell again after this action potential. But look at the contraction time. Contraction is a slower function and has a slower property. So when contraction just happens, then you have another action potential here and another action potential here, and then the effect of the subsequent action potential could to be add together, and it is a phenomenon which we call it tetany. But here in the heart, because the heart function has to be rhythmic, it has to be contraction time and relaxation time in order to be filled of the blood. If your heart go to the contraction and has a tetany, then blood cannot inflow in the heart, and then there is no uh, blood pumping, and everything will stays in the circulating system. So this plateau guarantee that tetany not happen in cardiac muscle. Why it's not happen? Look at here. We have a long action potential, so there is enough time to contraction to be developed and to be finished, and then this absolute or just refractory period and contraction just finish together. So we have time to refill our blood between those action potential, and it will guarantee that tetany not happen in cardiac muscle. It's really important. Just remember this mechanism. So this is a refractory period in the fast response and slow response. Look at here. We have a refractory period here, which action potential could not happen, and relative refractory period. And this is a slow responses, which has also refractory period. But what's important here, it is that the refractory period in slow responses just goes beyond phase 4. So it is less it has a lower probability to generate action potential, because just far during the phase 4 there is no condition that we could just generate another action potential. So the refractory period in the slow response are more longer than the fast response. So now we have action potential in cardiac muscle. Let's say how this excitation just copes with the contraction. Here in the skeletal muscle, in the cardiac muscle, like skeletal muscle, we have T-tubules. Even the T-tubule here even has a higher volume, like 25 higher volume and 5 times higher diameters. This T-tubule goes down into the cardiac muscle, just go to the Z line. In the skeletal muscle, the place of the this tubule are in the some way between A and I band here, somewhere here. But here in the skeletal, in the cardiac muscle, it goes down along to the Z line. But it's not such important. The important thing is here that the T-tubule has higher volume, like 20 times, and in this T-tubule we have sarcoplasmic, and we have extended sarcoplasmic here, which is the storage of the calcium. Also in this T-tubule we have a glycoprotein that can attach to the calcium, that can take calcium, and the amount of calcium here in the T-tubule is very high. So when action potential comes down through this T-tubule, it will active a channel which we call it voltage gated calcium channel. It is the dehydropyridine receptor, which is also a calcium channel. Here this channel has a small permeability to the calcium, so a small amount of the calcium will diffuse into the cells. This small of the calcium will active ryanodine receptor in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and most calcium needed for contraction will diffuse into the cytosol from the endoplasmic reticulum or sarcoplasmic reticulum. So remember, for releasing calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum in the skeletal muscle, we need some calcium inflow, some permeability to calcium, and then this calcium that come from the outside, which come from the extracellular fluid, it will excite or it will active this ryanodine receptor. So ryanodine receptor here is ligand gated, and the ligand here is calcium. Then the calcium will diffuse into the cytosol. So about 80% of the calcium needed for contraction comes from the come from the endoplasmic reticulum, and only 20% come from the outside the cells in the skeletal muscle. But the importance of this extracellular calcium is inducing releasing calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum. That's why we call this mechanism calcium induced calcium release. So in this calcium come inside the cell attached to the ryanodine receptor, and it will release calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Then the high concentration of calcium in the sarcoplasmic reticulum will attach to the troponin C, and those contraction happen that we know the molecular mechanism of contraction from the skeletal muscle. Here the same event will happen here. Then for relaxation, the calcium have to be pumped out from the cytosol. Most of them just pump back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, so a specialized calcium pump or calcium ATPase, and some of them will pumped out from the cells through this sodium calcium exchanger, which work as a antiport. 3 calcium come in the cells, and 1 calcium will go out using ATP, which is hydrolyzed by the sodium potassium ATP. So this is the example of the secondary active transport. Also, some of this calcium will go into the mitochondria. So the mitochondria is alternative storage for the calcium, but the most of them will go to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So here again you show that mechanism, action potential, permeability to the calcium. So this voltage gated calcium channel, this small amount of the calcium will release calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum through the ryanodine channel. Then this calcium will go and active the molecular mechanism of contraction like skeletal muscle. Then this calcium will pump back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, or it will pump out through this exchanger. On some of them, a small amount of them may go to go into the mitochondria. So in the skeletal muscle, we said that we can increase the contraction force by recruitment, which is using more muscle cells. But here in the cardiac cell, we couldn't use this mechanism because all those muscle cells in cardiac work as a unit. We have not more unit, we have just one unit, which call it syncytium. And also we could increase the force of the contraction in skeletal muscle using tetany. Here in the cardiac muscle, we have no tetany. We explained it before. So how we can increase the contraction force of the cardiac muscle if we need it. Here we can show it. In the cardiac muscle, it can increase the contraction force by increasing the amount of the calcium which is released during an action potential. So if you need to increase cardiac contraction force, the cells will release more calcium, and this more calcium make it possible to have a higher contraction force. So the cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle refer to the all events that happen between 2 beats. It means from the start of the 1 beat to the start of the another beat. All events that happen during this time, we call it cardiac cycle. So cardiac cycle has a 2 section, systole and diastole. So this systole is contraction time, the diastole is relaxation time. So it has to be a correct relationship between contraction and timing. So the timing of the contraction of different chamber of the cardiac have to be controlled very precise. So the duration of the cardiac cycle during the low rate or normal rate of the heart is just 0.8 second, which most of them is during the diastole. So the duration of the diastole in the normal heartbeat or normal heart rate are longer, about 2 times of the duration of the systole. So there is a plenty of time to blood inflow the heart. But as the heart rate is increased, the duration of the each cardiac cycle will decrease. For example, in the 200 per minute, 200 beat per minute, the duration of the cardiac cycle will decrease to the 0.30. So it may limit the inflow time. So if you look at here, the inflow time of the blood, which is happened during the diastole, just decreased to the 0.14, almost 1/3. But the duration time of systole just decreased to the more than 1/2 or more than half. So here we have a limitation in the diastolic time, so it will shorten the duration that blood can flow into the heart, and subsequent outcome may be the decreasing cardiac output. Regardless that heart rate is very high, the cardiac output may just decrease. Why? Because the duration of the diastole is very, very short. So remember here that with increasing the heart rate, the duration of each cardiac cycle will decrease, which is obvious, but the decrease in the diastolic time is very, very longer or very higher than the decrease in the duration of the systole. So here we have event that happened during a cardiac cycle from the start of the one beat back to the start of the subsequent beat. So as you know, we have an electrical event during the cardiac cycle, which it starts with a P, which is means the depolarization in the atrium, then QRS, which is a depolarization in the ventricle, and then we have T, which is a repolarization of the ventricle. So here is the start of each cardiac cycle. If you start from here, from the beginning of the diastole, so as soon as the previous systole finished, so we have the diastole will start. So at the beginning of the diastole, we have isovolumic or isometric relaxation. Why? Because look at here, the valve are closed, the all valve all closed, the atrioventricular valve or ventriculo-atrial valve, which is pulmonary artery valve or aortic valve. So they are all closed. So and there is a relaxation. So that's why we call it isovolumic relaxation, because no inflow, not outflow blood through this chamber, through the ventricle. That's why we call it isovolumic. And the length of the fiber is not changing. So that's why we call it isometric relaxation. During this time, the pressure inside this chamber is decreasing, but the volume is stable. Volume is not decreasing, not increasing. Just the volume is stable. Remember it. During isovolumic or isometric relaxation, which is the beginning of the diastole, the pressure inside this chamber, both ventricles, are decreasing very fast, but the volume is stable. Then the pressure inside the ventricle just fall behind the pressure inside the atrium. Then it will open this one-way valve, which always be open into the ventricle. Then we have a rapid filling here. we have rapid filling. The blood will rush into the ventricle. Then this is the passive rapid filling phase. Then we have diastasis, which blood just flow into the ventricle. They come from the vein into the atriums, and it will flow into the ventricle. There's a little blood that go into the ventricle during this time, which call it diastasis. So after diastasis, we have atrial contraction or atrial systole. So by atrial systole, the remaining of the blood inside the atrium will pumped into the ventricle. So here we pumped the blood into the ventricle because of the atrial systole. At the end of the atrial systole, the ventricular systole will start, which is the start of the systole, the heart systole in the cardiac cycle. So the pressure inside the ventricle will increase and it will close the atrial valve, which is mitral and tricuspid valves, and then the aortic valve and pulmonary valve also close. So here we have contraction without changing in volume. So here we have isovolumic or isometric contraction. So we have isovolumic or isovolumo or isometric contraction. Why? Because here we have contraction, but all valves are closed. So the pressure is increasing, but the volume is stable here. It's completely against this condition. So here we have increasing in pressure, but no change in volume. Then the pressure of inside the ventricle will go up after pressure inside the aorta and pulmonary arteries. Then the blood will pump out very fast. So we get it rapid ejection. So in this phase, after this phase, isovolumic contraction, we have rapid ejection, which most of the blood will pumped out of the ventricle during this time, which is just 1/3 of the systole. Then during the 2/3 of the systole, just remaining blood, a small amount of the remaining blood will just pump out inside the arteries. Then we go back to the relaxation time. In the relaxation time, the pressure in the ventricle will fall below the pressure inside the aortic artery and pulmonary artery. Then these differences in pressure will close this one-way valve, and then we go to the isovolumic relaxation, which is decreasing in pressure and volume stable. So remember this cycle carefully. What happened during diastole and what happened during systole. During systole, we have contraction with no change in the volume, which we call it isovolumic or isometric contraction and changing, pumping out the blood, which is we call it ventricular ejection. Ventricular ejection, it has two phases, rapid ejection and slow ejection. And during the diastole, we have relaxation, first isovolumic or isometric relaxation, decreasing in pressure, no decreasing volume, all the valves are closed. Then we have filling. Again, we have rapid filling and slow filling. The slow filling is diastasis. The rapid filling is just rapid filling. And then in the end of the diastole, we have atrial contraction or atrial systole, which the remaining blood inside the atrium will pump into the ventricle. So again, another thing important is here that 80% of the blood will flow into the ventricle passively without atrial contraction, and only 20% of the blood will pump into the ventricle, which means that atrial contraction just pump 20% of the blood into the ventricles. So here the valve of the heart, we have atrioventricular valves. Simply we call it AV valves, which prevent backflow of the blood from the ventricle into the atria during the systole. Also, we have semilunar valves, which prevent backflow from the aorta and pulmonary arteries, from the arteries into the ventricle during diastole. So remember it. So remember that this AV valve prevent backflow of the blood during the systole, and the semilunar valve or aortic and pulmonary valve prevent backflow of the blood during the diastole. So we have two prominent heart sound, which is normal. We call them first and second sound. The first one is because of the closing of the atrioventricular valves, and the second one is because of the closing semilunar valve. But if there is any defect in this valve, may we have abnormal sound during the systole or during the diastole. So look at here, we explain it by that. This abnormal sound, we call it murmur and blowing based off their frequency and their amplitude. So here we have murmur. What is the murmur? What is the cause of this murmur? The one cause of this is aortic stenosis. It means the aortic valve is very narrow. So during the systole, that blood goes out from the left ventricle through this stenosis valve. So we have an extra sound, which is, we call it murmur. So aortic stenosis cause abnormal sound during the systole. We have another abnormal sound during the systole. It has a lower frequency, which we call it high frequency, and lower amplitude, which we call it blowing. It because of the mitral regurgitation. It means the mitral is defect. The mitral cannot be closed completely. So during the systole, which the pressure inside the ventricle is higher than the atrium, the blood can backflow into the atrium. So the mitral here is not normal. So we have a sound during the diastole also because of the aortic regurgitation. Why is happening during the diastole? Because as I said, remember that aortic valve or semilunar valve prevent backflow of the blood during the diastole. So it's the aorta is not normal. So the aortic valve is not normal, and there is any defect in it. So we have a backflow during the diastole. So it causes some blowing sound. So also we have another sound during the diastole, which is because of the mitral stenosis. Again, remember that at the end of the diastole we have atrial systole, which pump the blood into the ventricle. So if there is any stenosis in the mitral valve, in this time we have some low frequency sound because of the flow of the blood through the narrow valve. So there's another defect that we can hear this abnormal sound all the way along the cardiac cycle during systole and during diastole. It is because of the patent ductus arteriosus. So it is a defect that there is a connection between aorta and pulmonary artery. So because all the way through the cardiac cycle, the pressure inside the aorta is higher the pressure inside the pulmonary arteries. So we have a continuous abnormal flow through this connection. That way we have an abnormal sound all the way through the cardiac cycle, because all the way during the cardiac cycle, the pressure inside the aorta is higher than pressure inside the pulmonary artery. So this pressure gradients make a continuous abnormal flow, which cause abnormal heart sound. So here we have all event that happened during a cardiac cycle. You have to notice important thing here. Most of them I explained it in previous slides, but here again you can see it schematically. So here you have isovolumic contraction. Look at here. During this time, isovolumic contraction, you have rapid increase in the pressure, but no change in the volume. I explained it there. And then we have isovolumic relaxation. Then we have rapid decrease in pressure, but no change in volume. Again, during the diastole, we have rapid inflow, diastasis, a little blood inflow into the ventricle, and then atrial contraction. During the systole, first we have isovolumic contraction, no change in volume, then we have rapid ejection, and then slow ejection, then it goes back to the diastole, which is isovolumic relaxation. Again, look at the change in the pressure in the aorta. So during the diastole, we have a decrease in the pressure, and we have lowest pressure during the isovolumic contraction in the aorta. Look at here. In the aorta, we have lowest pressure in aorta during the isovolumic contraction. And then after opening the valve, which is a rapid ejection, the pressure in aorta will go up to the high amount. And another thing which is important here is changing in the atrial pressure. We have A wave because of the atrial contraction. Then we have C wave because of the contraction of the ventricle, and then we have V because of the inflow of the blood from the vein into the atria while the valve between atrium and ventricle is closed. So the pressure inside the atria will increase during this time. So this is the most important thing that you have remember. So let's look at the cardiac volume. So as I said, during the diastole, the blood will come into the ventricle. Then at the end of the diastole, we have end diastolic volume, which is not changing during the isovolumic contraction. So at the end of the diastole, we have volume of the blood, which we call it end diastolic volume. It's about 120 milliliters. So during the cardiac contraction or systole, about 70 milliliters of this blood will pumped out of the ventricle. So we have about 40 milliliters remaining in ventricle, which we call it end systolic volume. So remember again or notice again, which we have the amount of the blood inside the ventricle. At the end of the diastole, which we call it end diastolic volume, 120 milliliters. Then we have, we pump some of them, about 70 milliliters, which we call it a stroke volume output. And then there is a remaining after systole in the ventricle, which we call it end systolic volume. So if you just present the amount of the blood that goes out, that pump out of the ventricle during the systole as a percent of the whole, we can say it ejection fraction. So ejection fraction is a percent of the blood that pumped during the systole, which is about 60%. It means 70 divided by 120 multiplied by 100, which equal to the 60%, which is the normal ejection fraction. It is a very good index to measure the contractility of the heart. So here we have cardiac output. What is the cardiac output? The cardiac output is the amount of the blood that pumped out of the heart during 1 minute. So here we have to multiply the stroke volume, the amount of the blood that pumped by each beat, multiply by the number of the beat during 1 minute, which we call it heart rate. So heart rate multiplied by stroke volume equal to the cardiac output, which is the amount of the blood that pumped out from the heart during 1 minute. So during this cardiac cycle, especially during those systole, the work has some the heart has some work, and we call it work output of the heart. This work output divided by two parts, external work and kinetic energy or kinetic work. The external work is the work which done for increase the pressure of the blood from the zero inside the ventricle to the 100 mmHg during the mean cardiac cycle, the mean of the pressure during the cardiac cycle. So the work which is done for increasing the pressure is external work, and the work which done for flowing the blood, uh, we call it kinetic energy. At the normal state, the kinetic energy is the kinetic energy is just a low amount of the energy that is used, or a low amount of the work that is done by the heart, but the most work is external work. Here in this diagram, you can notice the external work that is done by the heart during the cardiac cycle. Here we have period of filling, which is during the diastole. The volume is increased and the pressure is not increasing. Then we have a isovolumic contraction. The pressure is increasing very fast, but the volume is not changing. Then we have period of ejection. That pressure will increase and volume will decrease inside the heart. Then we go back to the isovolumic relaxation, which pressure is falling, but the volume is not changing. Then we encircle an area by this four arrow. The area enclosed by this arrow is relative to the external work, or external work is the area that encircled by this arrow. By increasing the heart pumping function, we can extend this area for the right by increasing the end diastolic volume, or by increasing the heart contractility, which bring this area up. And also we can use this amount of energy, potential energy, which is the blood that's remaining in the heart after systole, which we call it end systolic volume. Also we can extend this area to the left and use this potential energy. So remember that energy that heart used for during the cardiac cycle mostly is because of external work, which is increasing the pressure. But during the aortic stenosis, the most of the energy will used for kinetic energy, for kinetic work. So this is the bad when people has aortic stenosis, because the energy that used by the heart is not for increasing the pressure, but just for increasing the speed or the velocity of the blood. So for doing this work, heart needs some energy, which it's come from the fatty acid, lactic, glucose, and oxygen. Most of the energy is come from the fatty acid, which is about 70 to 90% of the energy come from the fatty acid. This number is wrong. It's have to come down here for glucose or other thing. So the heart mainly use fatty acid for doing their work. So remember that fatty acid just provides 70 to 90% of the energy, and the energy that comes from the glucose is just 10 to 30%. So preload and afterload are two important concepts in the heart physiology. Preload means the end diastolic volume, and afterload means aortic pressure or atrial resistance. So the preload is the amount of the blood which are in the ventricle at the end diastolic time, which it is end diastolic volume. With increase the preload, the contractility of the heart will increase. But the afterload is the pressure or the resistance that heart have to pump the blood against it. So increasing the afterload will increase the work of the heart without increasing of the the amount of the blood which is pumped from the heart. So remember these two concepts: preload, the end diastolic volume, and afterload, aortic pressure or atrial resistance. As we mentioned, for supply the blood for the different tissue and during the changing in the need of the tissue for blood flow, we need to change the heart function. So there is a two mechanisms that regulate heart pumping or heart function. One of them is intrinsic cardiac regulation, and other one is extrinsic one. So intrinsic cardiac function, which just rely on the cardiac itself, explained by the mechanism of the Frank Starling. So Frank Starling explained this intrinsic cardiac regulation. This Frank Starling mechanism says that if the left mean arterial pressure increase, the cardiac output will increase, or stroke volume will increase. So here you can see it in this diagram. So here we have the left mean arterial pressure with increasing mean arterial pressure, which is because of increasing in the volume, the work output of the heart or stroke work will increase. So remember that this mechanism also say if the inflow to the heart increase, the outflow will increase relatively. For example, if the inflow of the blood into the heart during the diastole increase 10 milliliters, so the cardiac output or stroke volume will increase by 10 milliliters. So it's also right about the left ventricle. So if the about the right ventricle, if the right mean arterial pressure will increase, so the stroke volume or stroke work done by the right ventricle will increase. Again, if the 20 milliliter increase in the right atrium volume, so we have a 20 milliliters increase in stroke volume by the right ventricles. This is a simple mechanism that regulate heart pumping. And so also we have extrinsic control of the, or regulation of the heart pumping. It's happened by the autonomic nervous system, which is sympathetic system and parasympathetic system. So look at here, if this is the normal heart rate, which is happen like this, we have increase in the heart pumping or membrane potential, then we have decrease in membrane potential, and so on, which we said before in a slow action potential. So it is a normal function of the heart at the rest. So by activating a parasympathetic system, so the rate of this action potential will decrease, and subsequently the rate of the heart will decrease. Here, look at here, the resting membrane potential will decrease to the minus 65, from minus 60 to minus 65 or minus 70 by parasympathetic stimulation. Also, the S-tip of this depolarization, resting membrane depolarization, will decrease, and it take longer time to reach the threshold, and then we have a slow action potential, and again it go back to the more negative, or it hyperpolarize, and this cycle will repeat again. So it gives a slow generation of the action potential in the SA node, then it will cause a lower heart rate. But by sympathetic activation or stimulation, the resting membrane potential will increase from minus 60 to minus 50 or minus 55. Also, the S-tip of this depolarization during the resting will increase. So it's reached the threshold faster, than we generate action potential faster, and it lead to increased heart rate. So by sympathetic activation, we have higher heart rate, and by parasympathetic activation, we have lower heart rate, which it can control heart rate, and by that controlling the heart pumping. So here, look at the effect of the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, in the heart rate and heart contraction and its mechanism. So heart rate will increase by the sympathetic nervous system because of the noradrenaline that affect beta 1 receptor, and beta 1 receptor will increase the IF current and calcium current, which increase the heart rate. But parasympathetic activation will decrease heart rate by acetylcholine, which affect M2 receptor, and it decrease IF, which is funny current, and increase potassium current during the resting stage, which this both effect will decrease the heart rate. So also the contractility will affect by the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. Sympathetic system again through the beta 1 receptor will increase contractility of the heart, especially by increasing the amount of the calcium which released after each action potential. Parasympathetic has only effect on the atrial contractility, not ventricular contractility, again through the M2 receptor and decreasing calcium current and increasing potassium current. Any thing or any drug or any chemical thing that affect the contractility of the heart, we say that it has inotropic effect, and what has effect on the rate of the heart, we call it chronotropic effect. So the chronotropic effect means effect on the heart rate, and inotropic effect means effect on the contractility. Again, some other factors can affect the heart function and heart pumping. For example, the concentration of the potassium. If the concentration of the potassium increase outside the heart or outside the cell, which means in the extracellular fluid, the heart pumping will decrease and heart contractility will decrease. The calcium has a positive effect or inotropic effect on the heart function. It increases the cardiac contractility, and the temperature has a dual effect. At that, if the temperature increase slightly, it will increase heart function or heart rate, but if it increase to a high degree, it will exhaust the heart, and the heart will be weaker than normal, and sometimes it may exhausted by this high temperature. So here we finished the part one of the heart physiology, and in the next part we will discuss about the heart electrical function, the mechanism of the generating this electrical event, and what we can record it and use it in order to just have a clinical indication.